Thank you so much, and in particular, thanks for the organizing committee that thought my stories were worthy of your listening. I tried to address the questions we were asked to address in a bit of a maybe semi-formalized way. Partly is because I can't help myself, but partly is because that way I keep in track. And I know we have 20 minutes, so I'll be looking at your clock, making sure that I don't pass 1 minute beyond. As I was trying to find really nice maps to put in my presentations, I found to my dismay that they were pretty boring, actually, the ones that I could Google search and finding one way or another. Nevertheless, this is the best I could do to show you a little bit of the Americas in total, but certainly the part of the America that I come from, which is from South America. So I come originally from Peru, from Lima, and well, there's about maybe a 6,000 or 7,000 kilometers trip to get to Canada or to London, Ontario. As you see, when I was trying to answer the question why, I hope you can hear me still, right? I'll move this a little bit. You know, it was an interesting question for me because I can't say that, you know, one day I sat down and said, oh, I should go to Canada. That's not the way it worked. So it started really in an interesting way. First of all, I met my husband in Mexico City. I was visiting my sister and he was doing his residency in Mexico City. And so we were engaged for 4 years, and then I finished medicine. I was doing medicine in Lima, in Peru. And then it was the issue of where we're gonna live. And so he is from Colombia. He's not from Mexico. He's from Colombia, from Cartagena. So he said, well, let's have a go at it and go to Cartagena. So I went there, and I worked there for the International Red Cross in the slums of Cartagena, which were, I think, quite impressive. So while we were there, one of the things we realized is the whole political scene was shifting in South America in general, in Peru inclusively, but certainly in Colombia, and there was increasing violence and increasing unrest. So at some stage, one of us came across an ad in the paper from the Canadian government that said, Canada needs doctors, and are you interested? Now, as it so happens, I was one of those that I always like to be ready, just in case of things. So when I finished medical school in Lima, I actually wrote an exam which allowed you to enter residency training, that means a specialty training, in North America, US or Canada, when you wrote that exam. So I wrote it, you know, on a dare. You know, we were a bunch of us in the class and say, oh, let's write that exam. I hardly knew any English. I only knew the English that I read in textbooks, right? But I went and wrote the exam, and actually I passed it. So I had that sitting kind of in my drawer someplace. And then this ad came, and it was like, would you like to come to Canada? In the meantime, I have to say, my husband had been researching Canada for a long time. He was in love with what he read about Canada, especially the nature and the geography and, believe it or not, the weather. He comes from Cartagena, right? 38 degrees every day of the year, right? So, so that's how this came about. So what we did is we said, okay, let's go to the embassy and see what would it take. We went and they gave us a bunch of papers. We filled up a bunch of papers. We didn't hear anything for about 3 months. Then we got another bunch of papers to fill up, and then, oh, go and get an X-ray and a urine sample and all those stuff, right? So we went and did those things. And the next thing we knew, we got a call saying, you have to come to the embassy. You have an interview with ambassador. And that's how we actually ended up migrating as a landed immigrants to Canada. So I had to tell you, though, that the conversation was interesting with ambassador. He didn't conduct it in English. In that time, it wasn't compulsory that you had to do that. But one of the first things he asked us is, what do you know of Canada? And my husband was reciting all these readings he'd done, and he knew all this stuff, really, really exciting. The other thing he said is, who do you know in Canada? And we looked at each other, and it was like, nobody, right? The next question was, have you ever been in Canada as a visitor or something? And of course, we hadn't, right? We knew some of the cities, but we never been here. So I thought that was kind of, you know, we hadn't even thought of that, right? But, you know, we were very young and impressionable, I think. So now, you asked to you know, one of the questions was, what were my barriers? Or what are barriers? Because we moved and then we became a family with my husband. And you know, I think they are not unique. They're probably the ones you hear all the time. You know, we hardly knew enough English. It was very interesting communication that had to happen when we arrived and we had to take a cab from the airport. I mean, I told you that we arrived in the blizzard. We had sweaters. We thought that was pretty warm. It was 44 below in Calgary, so it wasn't really very warm. We got out, we had a baby because my daughter had been born just before we came. And the airline, a woman comes and says, well, you can't take the baby out of the plane like that. In those times, there were no sleeves, right? When you get out of the plane, you had to walk in the tarmac. And so she gave me this, it was American Airlines, I remember. She gave me this blanket and said, just wrap her up. You cannot get her out of the plane like that. I had no idea that it was going to be so cold. So you know, it was some of that as well. But the fact that we didn't know English, we essentially depended on the really goodwill of the people around us to help us and guide us in the very first days. And remember, we didn't know anybody, right? We didn't have a community supporting us. So other things about, you know, even the dictionaries didn't help. I think they were American dictionaries, probably American English, but you know, I was trying to find moving company and I was looking for that and I couldn't find that, and it was cartage that I was supposed to have looked for, right? It was the wrong word. So even those silly things became, I mean, it was overwhelming, right? And many of you probably, if you know of people who've gone through some of that. And then of course there were the winter things. You know, we couldn't avoid them. It was 44 below, so we had to actually know what people really wear and, you know, what kind of boots. I mean, we thought boots were like just, you know, leather boots. Well, they, of course not. Not in Calgary, Alberta. You needed something more than that. So that was, I think, one of the big groups of barriers. I think there were also barriers that I have to bring up, which is specific to our profession. Although I had that exam, and the exam theoretically gave me an opportunity to access training, they didn't know what to do with me. I didn't fit it into anything. I couldn't apply to the traditional Canadian system because I was not a graduate from a Canadian medical school, and they didn't have a mechanism for me. So it was really and not that people were not wanting to help, it's just that they didn't understand what to do with somebody. And in Calgary, I'm talking early 70s, right? A long time ago. I mean, I don't think they had anybody from Peru ever. It took us 3 years before we heard anybody else speak Spanish. 3 years. So it was part of that problem. The credentialing, the understanding the papers, the access to training. Referees, that's another thing. And you know, until now, still a little bit like that. I hate to say this. That Canadians want to see Canadian referees. They don't want to see Peruvian referees, even if it is the dean of your medical school. They wanted to have somebody that they kind of knew some way, right? And all my referees were from either Colombia or Peru. I hadn't worked anywhere else, right? So that was a challenge for me. The other thing was the systems of health are different, right? So although I came as an experienced physician, by then I had done 2 internships, one in the Amazonian jungle in Peru, another one in Lima. I had worked 2 years for the International Red Cross. I knew how to do stuff, right? But I knew how to do stuff there. So I think those are really important to keep in mind that, you know, it affects your profession. So how did I overcome all of this? I honestly, of all these things that I came up with, in which many of which are very familiar to you, I'm sure, is one thing I very early learned is ask. Just ask. People will try to understand you and try to help you. And this is one of the wonderful things about the Canadian public. People wanted to help. I also learned very early on, and that was told to me by a very early mentor I had in Calgary when I started my residency, which was, you cannot just be good enough. You have to be the best. He told me that. And I know it sounds harsh, but I really appreciated that. So I'll tell you, I had a few strikes against me. Number 1, my English sounded funny. Number 2, I was a woman. Number 3, I looked different, right? So, I mean, and you know, and to round it all up, I had kids. In a time, remember, in that time in Canada, you still could fire a woman if she got pregnant. There was no laws yet to protect women, right? So it was this very, you could say, harsh mentor who actually told me the facts of life. And he said, Bertha, you work hard and you're smart and you do a good job, but you cannot do just good enough. You have to be the best. And you know, in a way, I never forgot that. And I know it sounds really hard, but that's what I had to do. You know, I had to be competitive when I didn't want to. And unfortunately, that was necessary. I got mentors and I got friends. And sometimes they mixed. That was really what made me survive that first winter in Alberta, really. Very quickly, developing a network of people. You know, you can see I'm extroverted, so I don't have a hard time doing that because now I know English. But just think about it. If you have to do that in a language you don't know, it's hard, right? So you learn very quickly the right words, the right things to say. I listened to candid and generous advice, even if it hurt. And sometimes it hurt when you get told, no, that won't work here. This is not the way we do things here. You know, and you have to learn because, you know, you don't know. You want people to tell you. One of the things I did say to my professors when I was learning, and my colleague residents, and I was the only woman in the group in that time, was I said, correct me my English all the time. I won't be offended. Please correct me. Don't just try to guess me. Tell me, no, that's not the way to do it. And, you know, the people were really good. They corrected me. They not only did that, one of my professors actually, every month he gave me an essay to write. Every month. I didn't have to because that was not part of the material training program. And I wrote an essay and then he took it home and he killed it. Right? He completely killed the grammar, the everything, and gave it back to me. And I was like, so thankful because he actually spent the time. He really cared enough that my English was going to be professional enough and it was going to sound, you know, as it should sound, right? And then, of course, when everything else went wrong, really, once in a while, I called home, which is not an easy feat if you don't have money. You know, and we came with $1,500. That's what we had, right? And, you know, it took me about a month and a half or two to get into a residency program and begin to make money. So you don't have money. So it's hard. And in those times, there was no Skype or anything like that, right? Well, there was no computers. So it's that long ago. So that's one of the challenges that, you know, that you want to connect and sometimes you can't connect. So some of the highlights of our journey, I'm only going to say a couple of things. First of all, I have to tell you that our arrival to Calgary, because Calgary, I remember when the pilot said, we are landing in Calgary, and we looked out the window, and I didn't see anything. And I looked at my husband, and, you know, there was this blizzard going on, I didn't know that. And I said, you know, I think we are arriving to the North Pole. There is no houses here. I don't see anything, right? It was completely white. So that was really pretty scary, I think. Remember, we had left Cartagena, it was 37 degrees, and we arrived at Calgary to -44. So there was a major temperature shift. We were wearing sweaters and we had a baby. So it was really a bit of an ordeal. We always remember it and we kind of laugh at it, but it wasn't really very laughable at that time. It was pretty shocking. Now we prepared us for that, I have to tell you. You know, of many papers we got from the embassy, none of them told us Calgary, you know, weather, December, you know, is going to be not like Cartagena. But, you know, we probably should have done more research on this and find out a bit more. And, of course, remember, this is pre-computer time, so research was not so easy. Another thing is getting a place to stay. And I had to tell you that we were at the mercy of the taxi cab when we arrived. We had this baby, it was late at night, it was a blizzard, get into a cab, the guy could hardly understand what I was trying to say, and eventually he got it that we didn't have a place to stay. And he was so kind, he took us to an area in Calgary which has a lot of motels near the university. He figured we were going to be wanting to be close there. And he negotiated very hard for us for a whole week of stay there. And, you know, and he was able to actually get us a deal, which we didn't know how he actually got it, but he probably appealed to all kinds of things. So we were at his mercy, and I never forget that man. We also, I think, had a lot of good luck, goodwill, and good mining. We got very good at mining, and people got to understand us a lot. When that one fine winter closed, that was a really, really interesting thing. We didn't know where to go. So they sent that to Eaton's, the most expensive store in Calgary. They sent us there. We went there and saw a pair of boots, and in that time, they were like 40 bucks. Like, you know, we didn't have that kind of money. So even that, understanding that, you know, you just come in. You can't go and blow all the money that you're bringing for food in buying winter clothes. So that was another interesting experience. In that time, Manpower and Immigration did not really have programs. There was no program for you to learn English. There was no program for you to help you settle. There was no programs at all. So you came in. The interesting thing was you arrived in the airport in Calgary, and they gave you your social insurance number and your health card right there in the airport. They gave you that, and they said, go on. That was it. That was your immigration. So it was completely different than now and some of the support systems that exist. Public transport became our friend, but it was a challenge, and I never forget my daughter crying because it was cold and standing in the shelter. You know, what shelter is? How good is a shelter at 44 below, right? But standing there, and her tears crystallizing into ice, the little pieces of ice falling off her eyes, and I was like terrified. I was like, what's going to happen to her? Right? I didn't even realize that could happen, right? But it did happen, right? The other thing was, people don't know you and you don't have referees. How are they going to rent to you, right? And you know, this was very hard for us to negotiate our first place. After that week in the motel, we got an apartment, and it was like, trust us. What can we do in order for you to trust that we actually are trustworthy people and we're going to pay? So having that connection in the community would have helped so much, but unfortunately we didn't have that. And then of course, the other thing that I think is important is, you know, you see Foothills Hospital there. When you are in my profession, wherever you go, you always have to prove yourself again. That's the way it works. Doesn't matter what it says, what credentials you bring. Maybe if you come from Harvard, perhaps they'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But otherwise, in medicine, it's pretty ruthless. The culture in medicine is like that. So you've got to prove yourself again and again, all the time. However, good work is recognized. And that's wonderful. People are observing what you do, and they are actually recognizing that. And I was very fortunate. I had terrific mentors and supervisors who did that for me. I had a lot of new support systems for me with my peers and my friends. And then, of course, the other thing we did is we actually embraced the West. You know, we didn't know there was a Canada elsewhere. All we knew about Canada was Alberta. I mean, that's what we knew. And we became real Westerners because that's the way we belong to the community. And then, of course, you know, always aiming for the top, but that was many of the advice I had received. So, for example, you know, I don't think how many Londoners will go and like to skate outdoors like this, but in Alberta, that's all it was. Well, this business of going indoors to go skating, forget it. People didn't do that. You went there to wherever they pour some water. It could be 25 below, and everybody there was skating. Right? So one thing we did is we learned to ice skate. The other thing is skiing, of course. You have to learn skiing there. You know, I mean, that's what people do there. And then, of course, you send your kid to elementary school, and they're even preschool, they're this size, and they're taking them to ski in Pascagoula, right? They have their boots and the things, they have to learn to ski. So you learn that too. We learned that we had to, in order to be part. Hiking, well, that for us was really a natural thing. And of course, having the Rocky Mountains helped. So we did that too. We created a community of people who like to hike. We went together. And of course, we also did the ultimate Albertan thing, which is camping. We became pros at camping. My goodness, we can camp anywhere. We camp, we will climb a mountain, and we'll camp. We'll be the only people at the top of the mountain, and we slept the night there with our kids. And in the morning when we woke up, all this deer were looking at us like, what are you guys doing here? Right? So that's the other thing we did. We actually learned to do the things that the locals did. And then, of course, 13 years later, and two more kids, we discovered, really, that there was Central Canada. Because, you see, we have never left the West. We got to know very well Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and BC. We had never been here. So only when I got the job and I came here, I discovered two things. First of all, that there was Central Canada and Niagara Falls and all those things. And also that there was a thing called Toys R Us, which you know, I mean, it may sound like kind of ridiculous, but when you live out west and everything comes from Central Canada or from the US, You had to buy Christmas presents in October because by November there's nothing in the shops. That's the way it was. You couldn't get gifts for your kids. So imagine I come from my interviews in November here and I discovered Toys R Us and I couldn't believe it. I could actually pick whatever toys I wanted to buy for my kids, you know. It was really funny. I joined the transplant program and began to publish, but more importantly for me, I think, my calling, I think, is in education. And I was able to do that here because of the systems that we have here. So I think it was a journey of discovery for me. I became a leader in education, I mean, in a serendipitous way, but I did become a leader in education. And I think I became a true citizen of this community. So it's been an interesting and very humbling experience for me. I think if you look at where we are at now, we are now empty nesters. Our kids are all grown up. They are professionals doing things. We did some horse breeding in the last few years in Ontario. Peruvian Paso Finos for those interested in horses. That's what we bred. We are now hobby farmers only. We have 50 acres in the south end and near Belmont, which is where we live. But you know what? We wouldn't live anywhere else. And we get asked this regularly. Would you go back to Peru? Would you go back to Colombia? And we go, we visit. I do humanitarian work in Peru every year and bring my students there. But this is my country now, and this is the country of my family. And you know, I wouldn't go anywhere else. So that's my experience. I think, as I said, I continue to work with the global health initiatives, particularly as it refers to the indigenous population in the Andes of Peru, with which I can work. I also do some work in Yemen and other parts of the world, but also, you know, we love where we are. We're very fortunate to be here, and I think we just won some sort of lottery, I think, to be honest. The advice, expect the unexpected. I would say that would be my advice. And you know, network, find friends, don't be afraid to ask, and be humble, I think. That's very important. Be realistic. And don't expect Canada to turn into you. Don't expect Canada to change, or the Canadians to be different, so they accommodate you. You have to become part of this community. And that means, you know, you have to adapt. Like we learn ice skating, for Pete's sake. I mean, who was to think? You know, somebody from Cartagena, ice skating. It's almost like the slave ride, right? This is just a group of my students. A group of medical students. I took one of my last times. I went to do some work in the Andes. And, you know, I think that's also been an opportunity for me to share some of these global health experiences with my trainees and let them see another kind of healthcare and another kind of practice of medicine, which is different than we have here in Canada. And so I hope you find this of some interest to you, and certainly during the question period, I'll be delighted to answer your questions.